It's clearly culturally assimilated with us. It's clearly evolved with us when you talk about it from an endogenous cannabinoid perspective. I mean, whatever we ask for, the plant seems to give. If it's food, fuel, fiber, any of it, it's giving us these incredible versions of it. So there's clearly been a parallel evolution. But yeah, the spiritual aspect of this is it's right there. Human and cannabis and hemp evolution. Yeah.
That's Jeremy Klettke from Davis Farms. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast, and my name is Eric Herlock. And today I will be talking to Jeremy. He's been on the show a couple of times before. I was first introduced to Jeremy in a voicemail from a listener named Reggie, who told me a few years ago that I need to check out these unicorns in Oregon. And from there, it's been a sort of a wild ride getting to know Jeremy. He's based in Oregon and Massachusetts. He is a cannabis breeder on the cannabinoid side of things, so this is a bit of a departure from my normal exploration of fiber and grain. But Jeremy's been working with the cannabis plant around the world for over 30 years. I really enjoy talking to him and hearing his stories. So that's what today's show is. We're going to hear some stories from Jeremy. He'll tell us about his first glimpse of the international cannabis market. He'll share some insight on the arbitrary nature of the 0.3% rule. We'll get his thoughts on increasing the THC threshold to 1%. We'll hear about certified seed, all kinds of different things in this conversation. It's a wild ride, and I hope you enjoy it. So yeah, we'll have a few words from our sponsors, and then a couple of updates, and maybe a nugget of hemp news or two. So, okay, thank you for listening to today's show, and here we go. This episode is brought to you in part by I&D Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where they believe in the goodness of hemp. I&D Hemp is a family-owned, mission-driven, and environmentally focused industrial hemp food, feed, and fiber company, providing new opportunities for farmers and rural communities. Their mission is to provide innovative agricultural products and services to connect American farmers with the pioneers and businesses that see hemp as a way to bring real and lasting change to our communities and planet. Learn more at indhemp.com. This episode is brought to you in part by the National Hemp Association. The NHA is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that advocates for sensible public policy and regulation. The NHA is dedicated to building a sustainable future and promoting economic development in rural communities. Become a member today and join a thriving community of people with a passion for all things hemp. Learn more at nationalhempassociation.org. Today's show is also brought to you in part by Cornell University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, where you can get a Master's of Professional Studies in Integrative Plant Sciences with a concentration in hemp science. You'll learn about production and processing methods, soil science, genetics, and a whole lot more. You will be supported by world-class faculty at a world-class facility. The application deadline for the fall semester 2024 is this coming February 15th. So go to hemp.cals.cornell.edu to learn more. Imagine how a year in Ithaca could change your life and propel you to a successful career in the hemp industry. Okay, welcome back to today's show. I've got a couple of hemp news nuggets here for you this week of November 15th, 2023. This first story I found on thetennessean.com, and the headline reads, "Is hemp making a comeback? Tennessee farmers eye an era beyond CBD." This is a familiar story about hemp farmers realizing that the future of the hemp industry in the South is in fiber production, and it's about the many obstacles in the way of growth. Here's a quote from the story. "And while fiber hemp is full of possibilities, they remain largely hypothetical in the United States until more companies invest in facilities to process the plant." There you go. That's the takeaway right there. We need investment. Yep, we can do this. There's an industry waiting. We just need investment. Okay, here's another story. This one hits a little closer to home. It's from WITF.org here in Pennsylvania. It's written by Tom Reese, and the headline reads, Hemp Uses and Potential Economic Impact in Pennsylvania. So it's a story about hemp in Pennsylvania, the hemp engine that got $1 million grant from the National Science Foundation, and, the need for processing, etc. There's some great quotes from some of our favorite Pennsylvania hemp people, like Dr. Ron Kander from Jefferson University, who says, I don't think we realize how well we're positioned in Pennsylvania. He talks about the farmland and the farmers and the know-how. He talks about the manufacturing cities with strong histories in manufacturing and textiles. And he also mentions the fact that Pennsylvania is uniquely positioned to serve large markets on the East Coast. Think about how centrally located the Keystone State is here. So it's exciting. And those two stories are sort of the perfect setup for this next update I have for you. So here at home in the Keystone State, the Pennsylvania Hemp Industry Council has launched its campaign to attract investors to Pennsylvania's hemp industry. With funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, the Pennsylvania Hemp Industry Council has created a set of resources to attract investment into Pennsylvania hemp. Educational videos, web pages, and a toolkit to help Pennsylvania hemp entrepreneurs get their businesses ready for investment. I know that we'll hear more about the Pennsylvania Hemp Industry Council's efforts on future episodes, but for now, I just say congratulations to that team for getting this thing going, and I'm happy to help get the ball rolling. And remember, in order to have a healthy, vibrant national hemp industry, we need to have healthy, vibrant local hemp industries. So please, let's invest in Pennsylvania. I will put links to these stories and the Pennsylvania Hemp Industry Council's website on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com. Okay, so now we're going to hear my conversation with Jeremy Klettke from Davis Farms. And just as a little disclaimer, during this interview, we talk about the Dogon tribe from Africa. And during that part of the conversation, we say that the tribe is located in Malawi, which is in eastern Africa, but the tribe is actually from Mali, which is in Western Africa. So big difference. Just wanted to let you know that that's what's going on. Okay, so I've rambled at you long enough. Let's get into my conversation with Jeremy Klettke from Davis Farms. Jeremy Klettke from Davis Farms in Bend, Oregon. Welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How you been?
I've been excellent, Eric. Thank you very much for having me back today.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoy talking to you, and I want to check in with you periodically, sort of catch up a bit. And I know you have, just a vast understanding of the cannabis plant and the history and in your own life. And I wonder if today, it's like story time. You can sort of tell us your, an origin story. Like how did you get your start with the cannabis plant, and what has it taught you?
Boy, that's a lot to unpack right there, especially that last statement. What has it taught me? Okay, well, yeah, origin story. So my background with the plant is pretty deep, as you said. It extends over 35 years. And I've seen a lot internationally with, how people handle the plant, and and what you say there brings to mind, I think, a specific story. So when I was 18 years old in 1990, to date myself here, don't mind doing that. I took my first trip to Europe, and in that trip, I had the opportunity, in traveling around, to visit Copenhagen, Denmark. And inside of Copenhagen, there is this little city inside of the city called Christiania. And some people will know about it. It still exists today. It's gone through many different forms. But at that time, essentially, and I was a young guy who did like cannabis. I was enjoying cannabis, and so I was aware of it. But at that time, what Christiania was it was a legal spot inside of Copenhagen where cannabis was being traded openly, and more specifically, the hashish. And what I saw there were different representations of hashish from so many different places in the region that it was an absolute epiphany for me. Like, here I am seeing all of these bricks, different colors, your blondes, your reds, your blacks, Nepal, Lebanon. I mean, all of this hash from all over being traded in Europe, and there's stamps on it, and it really made me aware of how culturally important this plant was. And it further made me aware that this was not new. Here I am, a pup from the West Coast who happened to grow up in a cannabis culture. In Oregon and Northern California, it was prevalent. My parents were a part of a cannabis culture. But to recognize that this extended not only globally, but that it was millennia old.
Yeah.
That this didn't just start happening in, like 50 years ago. So it was profound. It definitely helped me to recognize that, this plant was a culturally important part of our civilization for I didn't know how long. But
Right.
yeah, as a kid, it changed me, and it changed my respect and reverence for the plant and the way that I look at it.
Okay. And then, like, culturally around the world and historically, how have people, I don't know, used the cannabis plant? I mean, it has, more significance than just as a recreational drug, right? I think, I don't know, what can you tell me about sort of other cultures that you've learned about through the work in cannabis?
Yeah, well, I'd start by saying I think that number one, when we look at those and we look at the analytics of those, more heirloom varieties, what we start to see is diverse compounds, right? We start to see not just the THC, but the CBD and other minor cannabinoids being prevalent. So I think from a health perspective, they probably were consumed in a lot of ways that, were associated with well-being and health, not just psychotropic aspects, but certainly the spiritual side of it is there. The people were using it, not only medicinally, but also, like, I think as a sacrament in some ways. And you make me think, like, have you read Herodotus? Do you know who Herodotus is? The
I
Greek.
I know the name. I have not read it.
Okay, so Herodotus has this book called the Histories, and the Histories is one of the oldest, like, history books that we have, because it's a Greek, explorer, and he went all over Africa and checking out all these different people. And there's some speculation about how legitimate the Histories is, but reading it, there's it's a very interesting book. And there's this piece where he's cruising through Africa, and he comes upon, this is a kind of, I hope I tell the story correctly, but he comes upon this tribe of people in Malawi, right? And these people are called the Dogon people. And they're having, this is a little wild, but I'll bring it right back down. And there's kind of some stuff that makes it pretty succinct and pretty real. It makes you wonder. But he comes across these people, the Dogon people, and they're having this celebration that they have. It's a full year. These guys have a party once every 50 years. Okay. And this party is to celebrate this moment when this dwarf star makes its elliptic around Sirius, the constellation Sirius. And it's the time, you ready for this? It's the time when the Namo people, who are these people that come from that place, are able to make their journey to Earth. Once every 50 years, the Namo people are able to make their journey to Earth. So the Dogon celebrate it because 5,000 years ago, okay, 5,000 years, but before Herodotus gets there, so this is already a few thousand years back, depending on how you want to look at history. I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers, but the Namo people came down, and so here's where it gets cannabis oriented. So the Namo people came down. They're an amphibious people, and they, as a as a gift to the Dogon, they gave them their most revered plant to grow, and this plant was cannabis. Well, Sirius is the two dog star. Canna, bi, right? So canna is dog, bi is bis. Okay. right? So yeah, it gets a little crazy, right?
Wow. Okay. Keep going.
Well, okay, so um, the other side of this festival is the Dogon. Every year they harvest cannabis, and I mean they have this Malawi Gold, which is some of the most revered cannabis in the world still today. They bury these cobs, they bury it in the ground and let it ferment. So now you have stilbenoid action and all of these crazy other things happening with cannabis again that we're not even discovering. Now we know about kombucha and we know about you know pickling things, and so we know about fermentation. But so anyway, these
But
guys, these
fermented
Dogon people,
cannabis. Yeah.
yes, right. And so they dig these cobs up, and they're a big part of their, yearly, I don't know, medicinal intake, and they're a
Okay.
huge part of this celebration. But yeah, so now fast forward here, you get to the 70s. This story sounds totally lofty and totally out there. But now, when you go research, anybody who starts Googling this Dogon legend, you're not really going to find the leading thing being about cannabis and the two dog star and the plant. But what you will find is that you have a whole bunch of astronomers in the 70s who now have a telescope that can look that far. And
Okay.
all of a sudden, it verifies what these guys are saying. And about this elliptic.
Right.
And the big thing that you find in there is how did the Dogon people know about this before they could ever look that
Right.
far into space? But yeah, so when you talk about the spiritual aspect of it, that's just one tiny story from one
One
culture
culture.
in a little country in Africa. And I imagine that if we started unfolding history, there are probably a lot of other stories that are similar. I mean, here I am living in Massachusetts part time now, and go out to Plymouth, and very clearly, writings in the histories of Plymouth, they're saying that when we first, when the European settlers first arrived here, that cannabis was already here. At least in a hemp aspect, that they were using hemp for cordage and many other aspects, which that's still debatable. Like now, what you would read in our core history is that our founding fathers brought cannabis here from India and China at great risk, right? So again, like it's clearly culturally assimilated with us. It's clearly evolved with us when you
Yeah.
talk about it from an endogenous cannabinoid perspective. I mean, whatever we ask for, the plant seems to give. If it's food, fuel, fiber, any of it, it's giving us these incredible versions of it. So
Right.
there's clearly been a parallel evolution. But yeah, the spiritual aspect of this is it's right there. Human
Right.
and cannabis and hemp evolution. Yeah.
Is there a way, like genetically, that you could trace the origins of the plants, like, and figure out what cannabis was here, like pre-European colonization?
Oh, I'm certain that we could. And I think that it's an important study to be done. And I know there are some people like medicinal genomics that are really working on, through sequencing, creating a fingerprinting system that shows us. They were very interested. We had done an Acapulco gold preservation from a 1975 set of seeds that we had, and they were very interested in sequencing that so they could have a better understanding of where that came from and its relationship. You have
Okay.
the early days of Phylos Biosciences
Oh yeah.
who were making a what they called the galaxy, and
Right.
that's a relationship, plant relationships. And
That
I
was
think once you
controversial, though, right? Like
yeah,
that sort of went off the
and
rails a bit.
yeah, Phylos is still a little controversial, but regardless, this is all about data. We have a data void, and yeah, the answer to your question, I absolutely think we could, and I think we have a responsibility to do it to
Mm-hmm.
really understand the plant. I mean, if we find anything about going back in the gene pool, we find more compound diversity.
Yeah.
That we find that when we've, especially lately, when we start breeding the plant for specific purposes, we breed out a lot of the diversity. So like I think it's worth looking back in the gene pool just so that we can really understand the whole picture of plant intelligence.
Right. Right.
From a hemp perspective, Eric, like working with Aaron Appleby, who you've spoken with,
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
out of University of Washington. he talks about this plant communication language, right? Well, why he's so fascinated with the genetics that we're working with is because of the compound diversity. That translates to plant intelligence, right? Now the plant has all of the compounds and chemicals that it needs to communicate in the field. As soon as you start breeding it towards one specific point, like let's say we're breeding for THC, mm-hmm. which is the big quest right now in the United States. Well, you breed for THC, you generally breed towards also one terpene, one dominant terpene, which would be myrcene or caryophyllene.
Okay.
Your compound diversity really narrows. Take that plant and put it out in the field, it's not going to be able to communicate the way that these more intelligent plants or compound diverse plants are. So at least in my humble opinion. So when we talk about cracking the code for something that can, well, first give a hemp plant natural pest resistance in the field, which is important because we're not allowed to use, we have no approved pesticides for our new crop.
Right.
That's important. But when we talk about literally just breaking wide open pesticide language and maybe moving away from some of the bad pesticides that we're using, I think having these more intelligent plants is an important part of the conversation. So for that reason, I think we do need to look way back in the gene pool and from a genomic perspective, have a good understanding of the foundations.
Okay. I hear some talk of, cannabis genetic companies trying to breed the THC out of it so they can sell, a variety that is never going to go hot. Is that dangerous from a plant intelligence point of view?
Yeah, I think it's really dangerous, Eric, because if I've learned one thing about this plant, it's that its primary defense mechanism is THC. That's the number one cannabinoid that it produces to put its fists up.
Tell me more about that.
Well, so obviously, when you look at it from a pest perspective, the psychotropic impact, the intoxicating effect, that absolutely is going to thwart an insect. So it's the number one thing that it increases when it goes on and gets under attack. Absolutely. And it's the easiest thing for it to produce.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Do the attacking insects, are they affected by the psychotropic effects of it? Or how do you think it affects them? Like, are they out there tripping their little bug faces off or what?
I would be inclined to say that it doesn't make them feel good. I would say that, and it's hard to say, bug mind, what is that, right? But I would say that it probably impacts them from a pure anxiety perspective, that it probably causes them to
bug
not
out.
feel well. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, again, Aaron would be the guy to get on here to talk about this with and see what the insect response to the plant response is. But I do know that when you remove THC, you're removing one of the primary defense mechanisms. And here's another thing that I would really bring up. We know from breeding CBD. So obviously our big, problem that we had to overcome is this THC conundrum. Like, mm-hmm. How do we stay below 0.3 THC? Well, in that process, what we learned is that as soon as you start to bring the THC down even 0.1%, below 1%, the secondary metabolites disappear with it. So all of your terpenes start to go away. So to produce something that's actually 0.3 and carries with it a number of other compounds, it's really difficult. So I would add to that by reducing or deleting the THC, you don't know the byproduct. I guarantee you're deleting or reducing the plant's ability to produce those other compounds, because we see it through breeding, and those compounds are also important. But I don't know how much you lessen that language. So from that perspective, I think it's really dangerous, and I think it's extremely dangerous to do through deletion or through modification. I think we have a lot to learn. I really believe that we can use that as a tool to, do the deletion, put it in a place where you can learn from that. Okay. And then go back and try and naturally breed that in, because when you set that trait naturally, it's a very different thing than doing a deletion or an insertion.
Right. Okay. Couple of things from there, but you mentioned Aaron Appleby, and I think about him every time I'm in the garden or I'm like snipping some herbs for something I'm cooking. I'm like, oh, the plant is going to scream. It's going to, so it's he affected me, that conversation with him. Yes. Fascinating, brilliant guy doing some really neat work. But you mentioned, the 0.3% THC. I know it's talked about like that was decided arbitrarily somewhere in Canada at some point, but from past conversations I've had with you, you seem to have a little more information to that story. Is there something you can share with us about the origins of the 0.3% limit?
Certainly. And I would, lead with, this was, you go back 8-9 years ago, this was the driving, factor of, or the driving element of our breeding, was this 0.3 number. And at that time, we had now had hemp legal for cannabinoid production in the States here. And you had two subsets of breeding, groups. And you had the subset that was saying, look, we're just going to breed for the maximum amount of CBD that we can get. And we're not going to worry about the total THC content, because at some point we're going to wrestle that away. These are not psychoactive plants. Our pre-harvest testing is early, a number of reasons. And then you had us, and really it was us. We're saying,
who's us? Like at Davis Farms?
Davis Farms.
Okay.
Davis Farms, exactly. My group, my team. And essentially I said, as the leader of that team, no, I've been around long enough that I understand that this 0.3 number, when we talk about an international play or a global play, this is going to be critical. It's going to be what this all hinges upon. And the reason is that, again, the reason that they chose where they chose is they felt it was an arbitrary number. The reason that we chose where we chose is I knew it wasn't arbitrary. I'm old enough to have been around in the 90s and watched it come together. And essentially what happened is, you have a couple of guys, Joe Strobel and Jeff Kime, who were Canadians in Ottawa, and they wanted to grow hemp. And the Europeans were now growing hemp. Like, you had the Cold War end in 1990. All that Eastern Bloc hemp was now moving west, and it was becoming an accepted crop. It was commodities being traded in hemp at that time globally. So these guys, as pioneer farmers, said, hey, look, we want to grow the first crops of industrial hemp. Well, that gets Health Canada involved. And Health Canada says, well, we have to do this scientific quest to understand, how this can be safe. Because, well, we all know from the Americans that hemp is marijuana and it will destroy the world if it gets into the wrong hands. So yeah, sorry for the sarcasm, but anyway.
It's appreciated.
Okay, good. Well, so they get a group of researchers from Ottawa, led by a guy named Dr. Ernest Small, to start doing the research around THC and to figure out what defines a drug-based cultivar from a true industrial hemp cultivar as far as a THC threshold. So I knew this. I'm aware of this as we're starting into this quest. So it was very easy for me to say, we're breeding for 0.3 total THC compliance, and that's it. Because essentially these guys spent a few years out there, and what they determined was, based on minimal environmental input or environmental influence, combined by generational changes in the plant. So plant gets left out in field, that after 3 years, you can hit the psychotropic threshold, which is 0.9%. Okay. Also, that the other side of that is that we're looking at a baseline population being tested. So a homogeneous population of seeds grown being tested at 0.3. They bring up, hey, look, if you test one of those plants, it might be 0.7. One of them might be 0.1. Mm-hmm. So the notion that we could actually in field get plants, if you had one of those sports that was already 0.7 and she reproduces at the field, 2-3 years, she's hitting 2%. And now you're in a position where you're at a psychotropic level. So this was not arbitrary in any way. It was well thought, well founded. And although I'm a firm believer that it makes no difference, we should have a 1% THC threshold. Australia's gone for it. Even we should have it ratio driven, if anything, so that you can't create psychotropic plants, because CBD to THC ratio has something to do with it. But even though that is how I believe, there is a foundation for this whole 0.3. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about that ratio effect, and explain that a bit so other people can understand it too.
Sure. And I would say that it's still being debated to some degree as to what the exact ratio is of CBD to THC that actually negates the psychotropic effect. But ideally, what the idea is that as you increase CBD to a much higher ratio than THC, it negates the psychotropic impact. So
Okay.
if I think in Australia, they're saying it's a 2-to-1. Right, they're giving you a 1% threshold on THC, and it's a 2-to-1 CBD to THC minimum. I think is what their requirement is.
Yes. And that CBD suppresses the psychoactiveness of the THC.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And then did you say that like it's 0.9 is when the THC actually has a psychotropic effect, but under that it's negligible?
Yeah, and that is established again by Ernest Small.
Okay.
Yeah. So Ernest Small is the one who established that 0.9% of it being psychotropic.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Amazing. So it's interesting to know, but everybody should know 0.3 is based on 0.9. It's not really based on 0.3. You know what I'm saying is it's based on 0.9 and how it can drift to that. And 0.9 is a much more real number. It's much closer to that 1% threshold that everybody's pushing for. Now, I think we'll get there.
Yeah.
And I hope we do. And I mean, when we're talking about the 2000, the changes to the 2018 Farm Bill now, a big one of those would be removing cannabinoid testing. And I think that's critical because planting densities, you and I know this, I mean, you've been through it, planting densities the economics don't allow for cannabinoid producing seed cost, right, to be put in the field. But if a farmer can grow a 1.5% THC crop or a high cannabinoid, high terpene crop for hemp, that's a game changer because that crop's going to be much more pest resistant, frost resistant. It's going to be hardier for the field. So, the idea that we can get to that 1 or better will be great.
Okay. So, there's sort of little divisions in the hemp space, between cannabis and hemp or between CBD and THC or between industrial, fiber grain and medicinal. So do you think like folks on the fiber and grain side of things should be behind the 1%?
Yeah.
Like, even though it's kind of more about CBD, do you, like, it's still going to benefit that side of the industry to have a higher threshold?
For those aspects that I just said, we're in a position where we have a crop that has no approved pesticides, nor are we a group of people that want to apply pesticides. I think generally speaking, when you look at hemp farmers aren't a subset of the population that really believe in pesticides. So from that aspect alone, if we want to have hardy, pest-resistant plants for the field for industrial hemp, yes. And further, I'd say that Davis is now working to release, and we've been doing trials with it starting out of the country and now doing the first ones in trial, but we're looking to release a 50% American Feral industrial hemp variety.
Wow.
Yeah, because I think that, again, you have 200 years of exposure. And most of our cannabinoid varieties, just to put it out there, are 12.5% roughly in American Feral lineage, which is what gives them a lot of their diversity and field hardiness. But yeah, we have a 50% American Feral variety that I think is a great thing for American farmers too. Yeah. I just think to have American pride, not be relying on this dated European stock, right, certified stock. But yeah, and so I think a higher cannabinoid American compound diverse variety, what I think we'll see? Yeah. Greater yields, greater success for the farmer. So yeah, I think it's really important that we get out of our own way and stop putting labels on, hey, this guy's over here in this place and he's hurting me for this reason. I mean, it goes all the way back to the early days of hemp when I was battling with these recreational producers who were sure that, all of our hemp was going to cross-pollinate. I mean, it just, so you have them, all the segments of the same movement. And of course, what better than to just divide people in the same movement and then have them, battle with each other. So yeah, let's get out of our own way. Right. And let's realize that, there's great science in all sides of this industry and they can lend to each other.
Right. Do you think there's any danger in like big ag taking on cannabis or hemp being, in the rotation with corn and soy at some point? Like, do you think it will become one of those, like pesticides will be, labeled for it and it'll just become just another crop? Or do you think it will always maintain some other, special glimmer that, let's say, corn and soy don't have?
Well, breaking that down, there's a couple of sides to that. And I'd say one, yes, the larger ag is coming for this crop. There's no question about it. It's a new and wonderful crop. It's a disruptive crop. It's changing the game. It's going to have a lot of value. And the genetics are mostly open source and undeveloped, which if you look at the big ag companies, most of the revenue comes from seed sales and traits and development. It doesn't come from pesticides, even if you're talking about Monsanto. So the idea that they're coming, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Now, will hemp become something that is, like corn or soy, or will it be retain a glimmer, as I think is the word you use?
Something like that.
Yeah, right. I think that's up to us.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of responsibility there. And, I would say that if you question that, look at the food movement. There are a lot of companies that it's not as profitable or economical for them to put out a natural version, or to acquire a company that has an organic version of the thing that they're dealing with. But that's happening. There's a massive movement, and that's consumer driven. So don't underestimate the power of the dollar and your dollar as your vote, your ability to shape things. So my hopes are that we continue to grow hemp the way that we are, that we improve upon it from a genetic standpoint, and do a better job of making it pest resistant. As you and I know from our conversations with Aaron, we have the potential here to actually grow acres of hemp, extract the compounds, use them with methyl salicate, as he says, and then create pesticides that you don't even spray on plants. You just spray them near the plants, right? Just from that aspect, we have a great opportunity, and the potential is huge. And I'm always sort of an optimist about it. But we have a wonderful group of people involved in this. I mean, people like yourself. I don't think there are very many people in the industrial hemp movement that aren't really great-natured, want to see a better world for their kids and their kids' kids. I mean, that's one common driver. So Absolutely. It's up to us. Yeah, it's up to us, Eric, how hemp comes out. And I think we can tell big ag, look, this is how we want hemp to be. We want plastic replacements. We want remediation done. We want these healthy grains and better seed oils, so I think we can shape that a little bit. We are already.
I sort of want to just stop right there, because that's just such a high note. I love it.
It's your show, Eric. Whatever you want to do. I love chatting with you.
Yeah, I love chatting with you too, and I feel like I could talk to you all day long. But let's save some more stories for next time.
Sure. Since we took everybody way out into the weeds with the Dogon story, they're probably all sitting there going, I don't know, who is this guy?
Well, then I'll reintroduce you. Jeremy Klettke from Davis Farms in Bend, Oregon. Man, it's always so great to talk to you. I am just thankful that I know you, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Of course. It's my pleasure, Eric. I love what you do, and the knowledge that you share out to everybody in the world in this industry. It's massive. You've made some huge leaps and bounds happen, and I don't know if you're aware of that, but you are reaching a long way. You're reaching our people in Uruguay that we know, know. You're reaching our Argentinian people. I know you're reaching Africa now as it comes online. So thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for shaping this wonderful space that we're all working in.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's an honor to get to do this work. And yeah, it's about the people. Like you mentioned, the passion of the people in the hemp space. And yeah, that's what drives me. That's what keeps me going. So yeah, cannabis loves community, right?
It does. Well, let's do this again soon. I had a great time, man.
Awesome. I love it. All right, Jeremy, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there you go. Just like that, the show comes to an end. Thank you for joining us on this meandering conversation. And again, just to reiterate, the story about the Dogon tribe, that's a story. We're not saying that's fact. That's just a story. I was talking to Jeremy about how cultures around the world have used cannabis in spiritual practices, and that's one of the stories he shared with us. But again, that tribe is from Mali, not Malawi. All right. Anyway, so that's it for today's show. Thank you for listening. My name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com, where you can get a subscription to our print edition. You can sign up for our hemp newsletter, and you can, read a bunch of great stories about farming in the Northeast, farming in America. Sometimes we've got international stories too. There's a great story up there now about a goat that was on the loose in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. So be sure to check it out. If you want to get in touch with me, please do send an email. Send it to podcast@lancasterfarming.com, and I'll get it and I'll read it. Okay, that's it for today's show. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial Hemp.
Season 3, Episode 42 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2023 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock, and the music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tinbird's Shadow.